Of the Metropolitan Council to order. It is Wednesday, January 25th, 2023. And it was great to see everyone here today. We have a fairly brief agenda, although an important information item that we'll start right at the heads up. We're going to hear from Brian Ryks, the head of the MAC, about having said that, we're going to have our meeting in fairly quick order, and we must be done. We have a hard stop by 5:15 in order for the parking lot to clear out, because the nominating committee for the Met Council members is coming in between 5:15 and 5:30. So that is our schedule for the day. And having said that, that's all on the agenda. If there's any changes or questions about the agenda, speak now. Otherwise, I will assume the agenda is approved. And the first order of business then is the approval of minutes from January 11th meeting. Is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
So moved, Chair.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. And this is the point of the meeting. We invite public comment for those that have registered in advance on items not on the agenda, and nobody has made that request, so we will move on to our presentation. Brian, great to see you. Brian Ryks is the CEO of the MAC, as I mentioned. We always get an annual update. And I will say, as chair, but more importantly as a customer, there's always something interesting going on at the airport. And so we're really thrilled to hear from you and to have you here in person, because I think the last few reports we had over video, and it's always great to see you here. So welcome.
Chair Zelli and councilors, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity again. And you're right, last couple of times was virtual. So good to be here today. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what's happening at the Airports Commission, a little bit about what we've gone through the last couple of years, and then we'll move into some air service updates, capital improvement updates, and we'll end with a few accolades that we always like to brag about with our airport, if you don't mind me doing that for a little bit. I also want to thank Councilor Lindstrom. He is your liaison to the Airports Commission, and for partnering with us and participating in our meetings, and certainly sharing your interest in the business that comes before the Airports Commission. So I think you may know this, but we're a 7-airport system, actually the largest airport system in the country, under one autonomous control. And I always say, you know, what foresight the governor and the legislature had back in 1943 to put together a body that really was focused on promoting the interests of aviation through the metro area, and ensuring that we have one body, 15 members that are focused on really developing aviation and ensuring that we are doing all we can to address any environmental impacts that may result from the operation. So 7 airports total. MSP, as you know, is focused on really the scheduled commercial air service, scheduled commercial air freight activity, limited general aviation and cargo activity at the airport, because the system is designed to funnel that traffic off to the reliever system to ensure that we have as much room for additional growth of air service at the facility. It works very well, and I think a testament to how well it works was when we hosted the Super Bowl and had over 1,100 corporate and general aviation aircraft descend upon this metropolitan area. We would not have been able to accommodate those aircraft at all at MSP, and so the system, I think, proved that it worked very well. The NCAA men's Final Four was another great example of that a few years ago. So a little bit about the relievers too. I won't spend much time on the relievers, but they actually stayed very busy during the pandemic. This is a graph of 2019, 2020, and 2021. And you can see they all really depicted growth with one exception, and that was downtown St. Paul. And the reason downtown St. Paul didn't see as much growth in 2020 is just a result of corporate traffic really coming to almost a halt during that time. But it's rebounded nicely. When you look at the operations, landings and takeoffs at those airports, there's over 900 a day. So a pretty busy airport system. Flying Cloud and Anoka lead the pack, and then you can see the numbers or the bar graphs at the other airports. I'll move into COVID impacts, and I'm hoping this is probably the last year I'll talk about this because it's about time to move forward from COVID, but it's a pretty dire picture when you look at what it did to us from a financial standpoint. As you may know, we operate like a business. We do not collect taxpayer dollars to support the operation of MSP or any of the reliever airports. So the revenues that come in are very important. And in a typical year, 2019, we had over $400 million in revenues. And the flip side of that is just over $200 million in operating expense. What this doesn't show is our debt service payment, which is about $110 million on an annual basis. So when you add that on top of that, there's, typically we have $70 to $80 million left for designation at the end of a year. That money goes back in to support capital improvements and the assets that we maintain and upgrade at the facility. You can see the picture of how those revenues dropped almost in half during 2020, rebounded slightly up to about $300 million in 2021, and this year we're just over, right around $360 million. We also worked hard to reduce expenditures during that time. The challenge, when you look at that picture on the right-hand side, is you still have to maintain a large asset. Just because you have less activity doesn't mean you can't go, you can let, keep lights off, or, we did do whatever we could to shut our facilities, but it's a tremendous asset that we have to continue to focus on maintaining. The other major impact around COVID was to our capital improvement program. You can see in 2020, we had scheduled almost $400 million in capital improvements. We had to pull that number back. Now, COVID did allow us to speed some things up because of the lower passenger activity, so we took advantage of that whenever we could. But all in all, we deferred about $300 million between 2020 and 2021. So one of our challenges is catching back up and moving forward. An example of catch-up is in 2024, we have over $1 billion identified in our capital improvement program right now. So that will stress our system tremendously in order to do some of that catch-up. When you look at average daily departures, going into COVID, we had 469 average daily departures on a daily basis. We're currently at about 358. Now that number is interesting in that it's still quite a ways apart from where we were. One of the reasons for that is because the airlines have really pulled back on flying regional jets. If you recall those 50-seat regional jets that go out to locations that are not as distant because of the pilot shortage and really the need to have more pilots in order to operate those aircraft, we've seen a significant reduction in those regional jets. So that's probably the big impact. The flip side of that is even though we're seeing less operations, what we've seen is carriers upgauging aircraft, going to larger size aircraft to make up for that passenger difference that we've lost in those operations. So we expect that trend to continue into the future, but I will say the staffing, just like staffing is an issue in many industries right now, it's a real challenge in the aviation industry all across the board. This gives you a picture of the pandemic, the gold line there, moving into, coming off of 2019 into 2020, we were seeing 7 to almost 9% growth and then the bottom dropped out. We were 95% below what our numbers typically would have been moving into March and April of 2020. So big impact. You can see how that number kind of climbed a little bit and leveled out, and then the green line reflects this past year, 2020. We've hovered for the last number of months, really around about 80%. You know, in November we jumped up to about 85% of pre-pandemic levels. I think the big question is, what is the pandemic, what is technology going to do to business travel long term? We know there's going to be an impact there, and I think next year we'll really gauge what that difference will be moving forward. When we look at nonstop routes, again, on the left side of the page, you see we started before the pandemic with 213 nonstop routes. We dropped to a low of 91 in March of 2020 or May of 2020. That number has slowly rebounded. We were up over 200 nonstop routes this past summer. We're at roughly 193 right now. The forecast is that number will be 226 by about mid-year this year. So we will see a rebound. A lot of that is due to growth from Sun Country, especially, some Delta growth. Delta getting back to a 100% schedule, which they aren't quite back there yet, but they will be this year. So we've seen continued progress. We still have about 21 suspended routes. This shows some of the new domestic routes that were announced thus far. I think there's 20 listed here. 17 of those are Sun Country, 2 are Delta. I think Deltas are Destin, Florida, and Colorado Springs, and 1 is Frontier, a new service they commenced to Phoenix. So domestic, we're doing well, and as you know, that recovery came back pretty quickly. International took much longer to come back. The good news from an international standpoint is we are back with the exception of, I believe it's 4 routes, and those 4 routes are Dublin, Haneda, and a couple of routes in Canada, Edmonton and Saskatoon. So they've come back. All of our international carriers, with the exception of Aer Lingus, has come back. You may have seen, I had on this slide about a week and a half ago, Air France. Air France has pulled out of the market, but the good news is Delta is adding those flights back into France. So we will not lose any service or seats, and Delta will continue to offer that product. It was really related to an aircraft shortage issue and aircraft they needed to deploy in some other markets. But Condor has come back. Air Canada has added some additional service. Iceland Air has come back. KLM has come back, and Sun Country continues to expand their network as well. In fact, introducing the first service to Canada from Sun Country, and that was to Vancouver about 6 or 7 months ago. Capital improvements, operational improvements, or OI, as we've been referring to for a number of years now, is a complete remodeling and expansion of our ticketing, our baggage, and our vertical circulation areas. The good news is after 6 years, this project will be complete, Bridget, in 2024, right? Hopefully. This was a really challenging project at times. We added 15 feet to the front of the full length of the terminal, and it is hard when you're, when you look back to 2019 and 2018, record years of passengers, when you're trying to still accommodate, 110,000 people through that facility every day to ensure that everything works. And what it did do, however, that additional 15 feet really helped us through COVID with social distancing and the additional space that we had. We were also able to speed up some of this project because of the low passenger volumes during COVID. So great improvement, a complete transformation of that ticketing, the baggage, and those vertical circulation areas. One thing I want to point out, you see the glass on the upper mezzanine on the left side of the picture. If you look closely at that glass, what you'll see is the etching of Minnesota lakes all along there, different lakes on the On the south end are Southern Lakes, you know, in the central area are Central Lakes, located in central area of the state, and then to the north are Northern Lakes. So it's a great way to reflect sense of place throughout our facility. You can see on the right side, the new baggage carousels, much larger, more expansive, to accommodate really greater demands in passenger traffic. G Concourse expansion is another fantastic transformation of one area of our G Concourse. It's the area further down, I think it's G17 through G22. And what G Concourse, if you've been down there, and refresh your memory, is you walk down kind of a narrow corridor and then the concourse bumps out for gate areas. The challenge with G Concourse has been, it hasn't been remodeled in many years. The restrooms are small, and on top of that, Delta tends to operate some of their largest aircraft on that concourse. So it's been a constant area of congestion. The restrooms have not been to the capacity needed. The concessions have not quite been up to par. So this year, what we did is, between those bump outs, we actually added more real estate, more square footage in those areas. And if you're out there and you have some time, if you're not flying out of those gates, I would encourage you to walk down there because it is completely transformational. There's a large rotunda down there. And on top of that rotunda, this picture that you see is going to be the third Delta Sky Club, something that is desperately needed because if you've been in the Sky Clubs there too, they are congested. They're overcrowded, the two existing ones. So very nice improvement. This is a rendering of what the Sky Club will look at. It's scheduled to open in I believe, March or April of this year. So we're getting real close. It's going to have an outdoor deck, too, in Minnesota. Imagine that. But it's going to be, I think, one of the signature Sky Clubs in Delta's system. Another project that we're working on currently is a new aircraft rescue and firefighting station. It's replacing a 1960s area fire station that is completely out of date, that is too small to house the types of aircraft rescue and firefighting vehicles that we currently have. That is currently being constructed. The other piece of this, though, is a safety and security center that will combine all of our safety and security elements at the airport. Our airport police department, the fire department, our operations area, our emergency operations area, something that is desperately needed at our size airport. And this will improve our ability to respond and coordinate and calibrate incidents as they occur at the facility. Some planning activities, which we will come to you with here by the end of the year. The first one is our long-term planning at MSP. This really identifies what the need is over the next 20 years, forecasts that activity, and determines what our facility requirements need to be, both from a terminal and an airfield standpoint. So a very important project. It's been stopped during COVID, and we restarted it again last year. We are doing a tremendous amount of community engagement around this project, something that I have promoted all along to involve the public in what we're doing out there. Some of the major elements that you will see come out of this is a discussion around our customs and border facilities, our federal inspection services, where international flights come in. We need more space. If we're going to be competitive in attracting additional international service, we need to ensure that we have the space necessary to process those individuals efficiently. Another area that we're looking at is how best to align gates, how to maximize gate usage at the facility. I mentioned the reduction in regional jets. We need to look at how to maximize larger aircraft gates to support the current trend in the industry. On this side of the picture, you see concourse E and F. We're looking at straightening those concourses, again, to allow more opportunity for expansion, more opportunity for aircraft movement in the center of those areas. So more to come. I know Bridget will keep you informed on on this project as we move into and continue the project into the year. Flying Cloud is another one. I don't think we have a slide on Flying Cloud in here, but we're also working on a long-term comp plan update for the Flying Cloud Airport. Again, a very busy airport, and we need to make sure that we are planning for the future for that facility. A couple things. We did receive the #1 award from J.D. Power last summer, or last fall. First time that we've ever received that award, so we're very proud of the foundation of customer service that we have at our facility. We have an airport foundation with over 400 volunteers that come out there and help people get through the facility, do a fantastic job. We have a wonderful arts and culture program that brings culture and sense of place into the airport. Our goal is that if people are coming into the Twin Cities for the very first time, we want to give them a sense of what the Twin Cities and Minnesota is all about, and I think we've been pretty successful in doing that. We also heard last week we were #3 best airport on Wall Street Journal's list, so happy to be in that classification as well. And that's the extent of my overview today. I'm happy to respond to any questions if there are.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Brian? Bowing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick one. First of all, the airport is fabulous. It's just wonderful, and I always look forward to your updates. Thank you for this. It's interesting. And I love the art and the culture and all the improvements. They're really amazing. My quick question is the security entrance between the hotel and the terminal, is that closed on a permanent basis, or is that open again, or what's the status?
Councilor Cummings, Chair Zelli and Councilor Cummings, great question. From our standpoint, it is not closed on a permanent standpoint. One of our challenges, if you were to ask me what some of our challenges are, one is staffing. And that staffing is airline staffing, TSA staffing, concession staffing. We are over, I think, 600 jobs short out there on site. And it's been a real challenge, not only for us as an airport, for airports across the country. TSA staffing is down about 70 officers out of a contingent that should be around 650. So that's a big impact. So that checkpoint is not open. We hope to have it open in the future. I don't know when. There's another checkpoint out there we call the Skyway checkpoint, or it's checkpoint 10, and it's closer to the parking ramps. And it's a wonderful location for those that know how to navigate the airport. We get a lot of business travel through there. That checkpoint has also been closed since the pandemic, and we are working hard to try to get that open in collaboration with TSA. TSA's philosophy right now, we've actually expanded some of the checkpoints in Terminal 1, is to put everything at the front of the house because that's where the greatest demand is. So we support that for now, but we're starting to see longer wait times at certain times, and that is concerning to us.
Thank you.
Sue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brian, I want to do a shout out for your employees. I haven't flown much because of COVID, but I have to say that the employees there have been remarkable. And in the morning when I listened to Kathy Wurzer on NPR talk about the accidents going on out on the highways, I always think of our transit teams, whether they be maintenance or the operators or the police and other transit staff, as well as the transit staff throughout the region, including the airlines. And these folks are getting up in the middle of the night to get there in the midst of these storms to do their jobs. And so just getting there is a risk for them. So I just want to do a real shout out. Despite all of the stressors, somehow they remain very friendly. I have a number of family who flew out over the holidays, and they couldn't get over how friendly everybody was. And I tried to explain it was just because they thought Santa was watching them. But thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Anything else?
Peter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We certainly feel your pain when it comes to staffing. We have the similar challenges. Our last meeting of this council dealt with public safety on our buses and trains, and I know safety is obviously a top priority for you as well. And our Chief Greats, brought up how he was going to be meeting soon with Chief Christensen about greater connectivity or sharing of resources or something. I'm not sure exactly what the request is going to be, but I just want to say if ever Chief Christensen comes to you and says, Chief Greats is requesting this, please say yes.
Chair Zelli and Councilor Lindstrom, you're right, that has been a topic of discussion for a number of meetings now. I think the good news is there's a tremendous amount of collaboration between the police departments. Your chief has been out to address groups, has been part of meetings, I know, over the last few weeks as well. It is concerning to employees, it's concerning to passengers, and we need to stay on top of that, and we're all aware of the challenges with shortages of police officer staffing, but it is an issue that we are giving a lot of attention, and we appreciate the cooperation and collaboration that we're seeing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo my colleagues, but also I want to give a shout out to the food diversity and workforce diversity. So I get a lot of variety that's culturally appropriate. So thank you for providing options for our multicultural community.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for once again coming on this topic we all are tracking closely, and really appreciate the fine work and look forward to more improvements. And as you say, we can leave COVID behind and talk about the robust future. So,
Sounds good.
Thank you
very
and
much.
Bridget.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to march right along with our agenda, going to the consent agenda. Is there a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carried. Next, we'll hear about from the standing committees. Community Development has reports on the consent agenda, so we'll move on to the Environment Committee. Councilmember
Mr. Chair, we
Lins.
do have a business item.
We do? Oh, okay, well, then, I don't see it on my agenda, but,
It's on the published agenda.
oh, okay. Councilmember Lilligren.
Thank you. Sorry, Councilmember Lindstrom, to steal your thunder there. I saw you were all poised and ready to go.
Take a breath.
Right. So Community Development brings one non-consent business item forward for consideration today. Mr. Chair, it's business item 2023-29. It's to award $2 million in Livable Communities Local Housing Incentive Account grants to support nine home ownership development projects. So the council members, Mr. Chair, recall that in 2022, the council launched a pilot affordable home ownership program as a subset of the local housing incentives account. The pilot advances the housing priority of ours, of our strategic plan, which identified the objective to address racial disparities in home ownership in the region. And as we know, we have some of the greatest disparities of homeownership by race in the country. The pilot is intended to prioritize affordable home ownership opportunities in communities and for populations that are underserved. This funding cycle, we received 16 applications for projects. The total funding requested was more than 4 times the amount available to award. So we see there's interest and need in the region for this program. The committee is recommending 9 awards to communities and counties across the region. And when they're done, the projects are expected to result in 25 new and rehabilitated homes in Bloomington, Eden Prairie, Chaska, Golden Valley, Roseville, Richfield, Minneapolis, and in the counties of Ramsey and Washington, who also applied. So, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council award 9 home ownership local housing incentive account grants, as shown in Table 1 of the staff report, totaling $2 million, and also authorize its Executive Director of Community Development to execute the grant agreements on the behalf of the council.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? No, and Councilmember Lilligren, I'm sorry, I have missed it on my sheet, but very important that you caught it.
We like to give
have
money
Important
away.
action. Right. All right, hearing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, that motion carried. On to the Environment Committee, Councilmember Lidstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members of the council, we have business item 2023-16, and this requests that the council authorize the regional administrator to issue a stipend in the amount of $260,000 to each responsive and responsible short-listed proposer that is not awarded the design-build contract for the Metro Plant 4th incinerator project, up to a total of $780,000. The Metro Plant 4th incinerator project will be constructed using the design-build delivery approach, where the design builder retains responsibility for process performance. There is a limited market for a specialized project of this size, and there is a large concurrent project by the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District to construct 7 incinerators, which could impact the number of available proposers. If approved, this stipend will increase the likelihood of receiving multiple proposers, ensure an equitable process, enable the use of information submitted, and it invites quality and innovative proposals. Therefore, Mr. Chair and members of the council, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to issue a stipend in the amount of $260,000 to each responsive and responsible shortlisted proposer that is not awarded the design-build contract for the Metro Plant 4th incinerator project. This is contract 21P055, up to a total of $780,000.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you. Any discussion, questions? Reva.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, since we are acknowledging the work that's put into the proposals, I'm curious about how much the cost of putting together a quality proposal might be, and if we based this amount on that.
Mr. Chair, now, if it's okay with you, I'll ask Ms. Jacoby to, who I see is in the audience, to address it. But I know that for a project of this size, we spent a fair amount of time at the committee level discussing this, and it is considerable, the amount of work that the proposers put into this. I want to say even more than, it could be even more than what the stipend addresses, but.
Welcome, Jody.
It's okay, I'll let Ms. Jacoby take it from there.
Chair Zelli, Councilmember Chambliss. My name is Jody Jacoby, and I'm the Director of the Procurement Department. And this methodology for stipends is really based on what MnDOT does, a certain percentage that it's calculated. And so, indeed, as Councilmember Lindstrom indicated, we believe that the proposer's actual investment in preparing the proposal greatly exceeds this, but we feel it's important to compensate them so that they're encouraged to submit a proposal, and then in the end, if they're not selected, that we can use those design ideas for further improvement.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Ms. Jacoby. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion carried. On, let's see, the management has no reports. On to the Transportation Committee, Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2023-06 is for AECom Advanced Design Consulting Services Amendment 14 for the Metro Green Line Extension Project. The contract with AECom was executed in December 2014 for design and engineering services for the Metro Green Line Extension Project. This amendment will add additional funds to extend its service until the end of 2023. The cost in the amendment will result from higher than anticipated level of design support services caused by unforeseen construction challenges and the project's extended schedule. An amendment is necessary to seamlessly continue to work with AECom's scope of work on the project. Funds for the work are available in the project budget and included in the council's authorized capital budget. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Amendment Number 14 to Contract 14P125 with AECOM for Advanced Design Consultant Services to add $9.8 million for a total contract amount not to exceed $106.6 million.
Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you. Any discussion, questions? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion carried. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2023-07 is for Kimley Horn Construction Management Support Service Amendment 4 for the Metro Green Line Extension Project. The contract with Kimley Horn and Associates was executed in September 2017 for construction management support services for the Metro Green Line Extension Project for $8.5 million. This amendment will add additional funds to extend its services to the end of 2013. The cost in this amendment result from the higher than anticipated number of work tasks caused by unforeseen construction challenges and the project's extended schedule. The work under this contract is required for the remainder of civil construction. The consultant contributes expertise into the project's organizational chart, including providing the roles of civil construction manager and utility assistant council authorized representative, which are critical to the project. Funds for the work are available in the project budget and included in the council's authorized capital budget. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Amendment Number 4 to Contract 17P060 with Kimley Horn and Associates for construction management support services to add $3.87 million for a total contract not to exceed $17.87 million.
All right, is there a second?
Second?
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion carried. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2023-11 is for the right-of-way acquisition loan partial repayments from the city of Ramsey for parcels along US Highway 10. As part of the right-of-way acquisition loan fund program, the Metropolitan Council made these 5 loans to the city of Ramsey between 2004 and 2008 to purchase property that was anticipated to be needed for highway improvements along US Highway 10. Anoka County is leading the project to replace 2 signals with interchanges and grades separate the railroad crossings of the connecting roads. They require a small part of each of these parcels for the highway improvements, and with this transaction will prepay a proportional base of loans. The remaining parcels and loans are expected to be resolved after construction is complete and in coordination with MnDOT. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council accept 5 proportional repayments of right-of-way acquisition loan numbers, Ralph loans, numbers L0801, L0705, L0404, L0503, and L0602 in the city of Ramsey, and release the related council claim on the portions of the property that the payments are intended to cover.
All right, is there a second?
0 seconds.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carried. Councilmember Barber, I think you're one more, right?
Last one. So, but this is a big one, especially because we have our friends from MEC here. So, Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2023-12 is the council's annual review of the Metropolitan Airports Commission's capital improvement program for the years 2023 through 2029. The council reviews the MAC CIP annually under a requirement in state statute. The council is charged with reviewing the CIP for consistency and conformance with the region's aviation system plan and the transportation policy plan. Statute also requires the council to approve projects that meet certain dollar thresholds and potential for significant impacts. Staff conducted a review of the 2023 through 2029 CIP and found it to be consistent with the 2040 Transportation Policy Plan and identified no projects that require council approval in 2023. Staff will also confirm that MAC held an adequate public process in development and review of the CIP. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council find the Metropolitan Commission had an adequate public participation process for the development and review of its 2023 through 2029 capital improvement program, including preparation for the assessment of environmental effects for 2023 projects with potential environmental effects. Find that the 2023 CIP projects are in conformance with the region's aviation system plan in the 2040 transportation policy plan and are consistent with council policy.
Thank you.
Second.
Second, thank you, Mr. Turner. Any comments, questions? I think this gives us full confidence behind the MAC plan. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carried. Thank you, Councilmember Barber and everyone. We're on to our 2 information items for this evening. And I see Legislative Affairs Director Judge Hutton to give us an update. And then we're going to go on and hear about COVID lessons learned. But welcome, Judge.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. It's great to be here. Again, I'm Judge Shetland, the Government Affairs Director for the Council. I have to say this every time before I go before a committee, so it just kind of happens. I want to do that here as well, but I believe Greg has the presentation in the back here, so hopefully we're able to walk through it. Otherwise, maybe you have a copy of it before you. Okay, so as folks know, the legislature convened here just at the beginning of the month. And in January, we had some major changes that went on because there was redistricting, and all members of the House and Senate were up, so all 201 members and the constitutional officers as well. And so we are dealing with a number of new members. About 30% of the membership of the legislature is new. So it's always a fill-out process. I know we have a few former legislators here as well. So it's good to be able to meet some of those folks and be able to help them understand the role of the council and what we do and how we fit in. And so that is what we are doing at this point, but I'll also say that the legislature is also starting with a bang and moving very quickly with a few items as well. But one of the major things that we are doing right now in this legislative session is preparing the budget for the next 2 fiscal years, for fiscal years 24 and 25. And this is not a surprise to anyone, but we do have a significant budget surplus in the range of $17.6 billion, and about $12 billion of that was carried over from the previous biennium. And that money is there because there was lower expected growth and there were lower expected income growth and reduced tax revenue forecast, which is a big part of this. Also, there were lower healthcare costs that reduced spending, and one of the things I think is really important for folks to keep in mind here is that inflation is not built into this, and that is one thing that we're hearing from the legislature, is to make sure that when we talk about spending, that there is also inflation that will be added to that. It's also important to note that that there is an anticipated surplus heading into the following the tails budget of about $8 billion, but again, that all gets adjusted as well when you apply inflation to that as well. Last thing I want to mention on that is while the governor has put out his budget, there will be an updated February forecast that we will receive at the end of this month, that the legislature will look at, the governor will look at, and that's really the forecast that the legislature will use as we move forward to actually coming to a budget agreement in the end of May. And so that is so that's the one that really matters, and the governor at that point oftentimes will come and forward with a supplemental budget adjustment, and so we'll see where all of that shakes out. But we will see the House and Senate start moving forward with their big budget bills once we know what the February forecast looks like. Just going to move on here a little bit related to to our specific items, and here we go. We'll see if this pops up. But anyway, I'll speak to. Oh, here you go. Thanks, you guys. Let me go back here. So the council's role in our One Minnesota budget, investing in the Minnesota's economic future, we have a role in that, and we have many aspects of the council's broader work that that participates in this. And the first one is the governor has made a recommendation related to our parks and trails system. He's recommending $12 million in one-time spending that will be matched by council dollars. That I'm going to have to read this from my notes because I can't read that far. That will support improvements to the regional park system. This is really one-time capital investment. It's we also receive general obligation bonds for this, and we have in the past, but this is cash. And so this is great. Cash is great with a surplus because you can really do one-time fixes and do one-time spending on this. So we're actually really, really happy that that he decided to include this one-time general fund appropriation for parks. And again, we're able to flex that with council dollars as well. These dollars will be distributed amongst all of the implementing agencies across the metro area. And so it's like a cash bonding bill. I know that doesn't make any sense, but we talk about that. I know Councilmember Fredson is familiar with that. We talk about cash bonding. We've done that in previous years when there's been significant one-time money available. So that's what we're doing here in the governor's budget. The second piece to this is also, I think, a great aspect of the governor's budget that relates to the regional park system, because he's actually, with his $12.5 million recommendation for parks operations and maintenance, he's increasing our base operational funds that we pass through to the implementing agencies by $2.5 million each year, or $5 million for the biennium. So when I say it's a base increase, that means that he's carrying that forward into future budget years. So we're there between this $12 million that we're matching the $8 million with, and then seeing an increase of $5 million over the biennium. We're making some really good investments and strong investments in our park system. And I just want to add that the governor is going to be releasing his bonding request as well, and so that will happen tomorrow, so I'm not going to get out in front of this. But this is in addition to whatever he will be recommending relating to bonding. The last piece here is the Legacy Parks and Trails Fund. I think folks are familiar. There's a 40-40-20 split on that. This is consistent with how those funds will be distributed. And again, you can see the funds that and how they are distributed through that formula. But again, that will go through the House and Senate Legacy committees. But there seems to be broad support. There isn't disagreement over the formula right now. So there's peace in the valley, or kumbaya, or whatever people want to say. We hear it all at the legislature, but that is where we stand, at least related to parks. On environmental services, and I'm trying to move faster because I know that we're under a little bit of time crunch. So for environmental services, we have a great recommendation for the governor. We had this in previous years related to a one-time $5 million appropriation from the general fund that he is providing to the council to create a climate impact assessment tool that then we can use with local governments to make sure we see where areas may be impacted by water or by drought. And it is a tool that we have worked with the governor's sub-cabinet on climate. We brought this forward previously, and unfortunately not much of anything passed last year, I think folks will recall, but we feel that we have a much better chance of this being included this next session. And also we participate in the Clean Water Fund out of the Legacy account, and we are back with our water sustainability support funds and our water efficiency grants. We've really been successful with the legislature in receiving these funds in the past. We had great support from our environmental services folks in the past. I know Ali El Hassan is gone, but Ali was great. We got Sam and his group that are right there helping us and continuing to help us with this as well. But I want to just, I know that Ali is gone, but just so folks know, he was really, really great to work with on this in the past, and our folks currently in environmental services are equally as committed to this. So this is great, and the legislature actually really likes this. So that is fantastic. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead without using the clicker. So the next one is transportation. And just yesterday, the governor announced that he is recommending a regional sales tax for a 1/8 cent for the region. These funds will help us address both our operating and capital needs for our regional transit system. And one of the best parts of this is we've talked about this with the council and with the legislature for many years, but we have a significant structural cliff in our operations. And so having reliable and ongoing dedicated funding for our transit system will allow us to get that under control. I will say that, that this is the start of a conversation on transit and regional transit investment. I know that the chairs in the House and Senate, both Representative Hornstein and Senator Dibble, are very interested in looking at additional funding for transit. And I know that between the council and with the leadership of the administration are going to fully engage on what that might look like. And so this is a starting point for us and not necessarily the ending point, but we do know that this, no matter what it looks like, it's going to help us address some of those structural issues and also allow us to put some funding towards our Transit Way capital program. The next one is we do this every year, but $100 million is a really big deal. We're seeking new authority from the legislature to allow us to levy a property tax for us to be able to bond, to pay the debt service for the bonds to replace fleet for our transit system. And it's not just Metro Transit, it's Metro Mobility, it's the suburban transit providers, it's TransitLink, it's the regional transit system. And this is the 20% match that we receive in order to leverage the additional funds related to federal funds that come in for fleet replacement. The next piece here is allows us to accelerate our zero emissions public transit bus plan, and so the governor recommended just shy of $30 million that will allow us to fund up to an additional 30 battery electric buses for our system. This is the piece that we currently are receiving buses that cost this much. We are using these dollars to pay the increment to turn those into battery electric buses. And so that allows us to really accelerate this zero emission plan. The legislature is very interested in this. We know that there is a part of the IIJA funds that came through Congress and President Biden that are making those no and low emission bus grants available. This is how we are planning to leverage those dollars. And so we tried very hard last year. We were on the cusp of getting this done. Things kind of fell apart at the end, and so we're back asking for this. And I also want to note that these funds will be also helpful for our suburban transit provider systems as well, because we know that they have needs. We wanted to make sure there was enough for everyone in there. We have our Transit Safety and Administrative Citations Initiative that is back. There is a lot of hope and expectations that we're going to get this passed this year. There is some push to try to get it done before we have to move into the giant, budget discussions. And so we're hoping that this bill will be made available here in the next week. There's a process that we have to go through. And so we're lining up support for that right now. It really is a critical piece to one of the things that we can do related to transit safety, but also making sure that we're reducing what a fare evasion looks like. We're trying to make this much more similar to what a parking ticket would look like and not make it a criminal act. And so there is, as I mentioned, broad support for that. I think we'll see that hopefully move relatively quickly, but we're very excited to take another shot at that. We actually started with the legislature talking about this in 2018. And I swear, and Chair Zelli and Regional Administrator Bogie I think they'll agree. We had it up last year. If there was going to be a transportation bill, we were going to get this done. And so I think we've got broad bipartisan support in order to get this. I think people realize that this is part of one of the things that we can do. We just need the legislature to actually act to make these two actions happen. So that's great. The last piece I am just going to whip through. We have some policy proposals. Many of them are technical and housekeeping in nature, so I'm not going to dig into that, but I'm happy to follow up with any of you kind of explaining what these look like. But these are items that come from our divisions that are asking us to potentially clean up some ambiguity or to just update where particular things sit in statute. And so as far as our policy initiatives, getting administrative citations and our transit safety initiative passed this year is where we're at, and we will get these hopefully done as well. But with that, I'm just going to go to the next slide here. As I mentioned before, the governor will make his bonding announcement tomorrow, and we do know that there will be some discussion related to council governance at the legislature. We have that conversation pretty regularly with the legislature as well. This is an interesting time because we're going through the process of having our council members reappointed for the new Governor Wall's term, and then we're also going to have a redistricting bill for the Metropolitan Council passed this year, which will draw new lines. And so the council members will be seated, then we'll have a new bill that will pass sometime in May, potentially earlier, and then we'll figure out what that looks like. Generally in these situations, there are a couple council districts that are combined, which means there are a couple vacancies, and so we don't have to go through the full thrust of the redistricting process, but there are a few things that happen. I know Councilmember Wolf participated; she was here when we did this previously, and so it can be a smooth process as well, but it just is something that we're going to be working on with the legislature to pass. And the last slide I have here, we'll just talk about where we're at. As I mentioned, we have the forecast that will come out at the end of the month. The legislature will take an Easter Passover break in early April, and the legislature must adjourn by May 22nd. You know, knock on wood, the legislature has adjourned on time in the past, but they've always had to come back for special sessions, and I am just very hopeful that we'll be able to avoid that this year, but we'll wait and see how things happen, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed. And with that, Mr. Chair and members, I will stop and take any questions, and hopefully I didn't take too much time.
Not at all. Any questions for Jen? Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I would just ask you to say a little bit more about what's required in terms of votes for a bonding bill versus a cash-only bonding bill.
That is a great question. Thank you, council member. So bonding bill takes a supermajority or 60% of a body to pass. And so when we talk about a cash bonding bill, it's really a general fund spending bill, and you just need a simple majority in order to pass that. And so we've been in those situations before where sometimes it's easier to pass some projects with cash because you don't have to get that supermajority threshold. But that is a very important point, and we still have, when we're looking at a bonding bill, I think both bodies do not have the supermajority of votes available to pass it without having to have some of the minority bodies or minority caucuses have to participate in that. So that's a very good point. So thank you for raising that.
And I'll remind everyone, this is a process. We're going to have more reports along the way, but be a couple of months. So Sue, you get the last question.
It's a thank you. As the council rep with the IMPASC commissioners, I just want to say thank you. I think I can speak on behalf of all of them. I think that they're thrilled with the robust effort being made with regard to the regional parks. So thank you.
And I will say a conversation I had with Commissioner Stroman, we're working closely with the DNR to think about the outdoors as a statewide, including the metro kind of initiative. And I think we'll want to work more closely.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I could, our next report's going to be on lessons learned from COVID. During COVID, the regional parks and open spaces were so used that the numbers were significant in almost all of the instances, and that was great, but there comes a cost with that. And so these dollars, hopefully all of these dollars, and maybe even more, will be...
Are needed.
Yeah, are very needed, so thank you.
Thank you, Judd Shutton, and we'll look forward to seeing you back.
Sounds great.
All right, so last but not least, Kathy Matter, Program Manager for Business Continuity. If there was ever a test for business continuity, it's been the past 3 years. So we're looking forward to hearing what we've learned.
Chair Zelli, council members, I'm Kathy Matter. I'm the manager of the Business Continuity Program here at the Met Council. And I report to Phil Waljasper, who's the enterprise risk manager here at the council, who in turn reports to Deputy Regional Administrator Gonzalez. This information is compiled from the perspective of the leaders and managers who guided us at the Met Council through COVID and everything associated with COVID here at the council. The business continuity program at a high level is really responsible for helping the Met Council organization do the planning that it needs to do to prepare for different types of crises, following regulatory requirements, executive orders, governor's executive orders, even presidential directives in some cases. And it's our job to just really align those expectations and that work with and collaborate with the Met Council organization to make that work happen and hopefully make us more resilient and able to deal with a crisis, including a pandemic planning crisis. So that is the backstory for my organization. The pandemic plan is an enterprise-focused plan designed to help this entire organization figure out how we would respond to and manage a pandemic crisis if it were to happen. We had that plan in place, and then we had a pandemic. So we were really, really fortunate as an organization to have done that thinking and strategizing to figure out how we would maybe respond to a pandemic if it were to happen. None of us in our lifetime have dealt with something like this, including business continuity programs. So it was interesting and challenging for all of us. We as an organization, as a state related organization, we are required to utilize what's called the National Incident Management System, NIMS. That is a process and a framework that is used by all emergency responders throughout the United States. And it's really designed to help an organization, number one, identify who's in charge, who's the boss, and just kind of put a logistical structure to our crisis management and crisis response. This slide is a high-level representation of that structure for the Met Council without names attached to it. At the beginning, when COVID first hit the news, our first case in Minnesota was March 6th of 2020. 6 days later, 4 days later, we declared our own emergency situation within the Met Council. That emergency declaration really homes to a procurement policy, which helps us do crisis purchasing in the event of something bad happening. And so early on, almost immediately, we as an organization, Meredith Vedas and Mary Bogie, just immediately said, something's happening. We have to be prepared. And so those initial days were set with us as an organization figuring out what are we going to do? We have a pandemic plan. We declared an emergency and then waited for further information coming out of the state of Minnesota with COVID happening here in the state, and then the governor doing his governor's executive orders, first declaring a peacetime emergency and then issuing the peacetime emergency or the stay-at-home order, ordering us all to begin working from home if we could. We had a lot of people in this organization who couldn't work from home. Crisis management highlights for us as an organization were that just immediate kind of thumb on the pulse of what's happening for us as an organization. We activated our pandemic plan and immediately set to meeting and figuring out enterprise-wide what the impacts were and necessary steps were as an organization to respond to and just really continue our services as an organization, what were our critical services for this organization, and how do we keep them going. We plugged as an organization into the state's emergency response. We lost some critical people. We didn't lose them. They were just pulled up into a higher decision-making authority and crisis management authority. But that also allowed us as an organization to do what we needed to do to respond and manage the crisis. I'm sorry, I'm reading my notes here. Throughout the pandemic, our number one priority was our people, keeping our people safe, not just those working from home, but those who had to come in and do the work they do all day, every day for this region. Notably, it was on the Metro Transit side of the equation, the bus operators and everyone who supported that infrastructure, wastewater treatment services. Ultimately, it also affected, though, community development, housing inspectors. It reached throughout this organization. We leveraged critical relationships at the state level, at the county level, at the city level, to the benefit of our organization and people associated with our organization. Through Ramsey County and Dakota County, we had access to early vaccination efforts throughout this community that we were able to plug our wastewater treatment employees into, to our contracted service providers in the Metro Mobility system. So those relationships were just huge for us as an organization. And throughout the entire pandemic situation, we just, I call it mastering the art of the pivot. Things were changing on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and we had to be able to adjust to that and accommodate that as a organization, as a critical organization within this region. At the end, in March 2022, Met Council's COVID Emergency Declaration and Pandemic Plan activation were formally ended. We identified and implemented a process for gathering enterprise-wide lessons learned, mostly so that we knew what we did and what we needed to capture in the event something like this ever happens again. And then we transitioned. The biggest residual COVID issue was what does it look like now to work at the Met Council? And I would say we're still dealing with that today. All organizations are dealing with that still today. Lessons learned specific to us. I interviewed, over 60 people. It was all leadership and manager level staff who were responsible for helping guide this organization through its response and management of COVID. People really used it as an opportunity to really talk about the impacts to their work units and to their divisions, and the impacts were significant throughout the organization. The first thing we learned, and we knew it right away with our response, is that we were more prepared and we were more ready than we realized. We hit the road running. We transitioned immediately into leadership crisis mode. Procurement immediately began the work of procuring critical supplies that were in scarce and scant supply, sometimes not available at all. But they were working around the clock to get those supplies that we needed, not just to protect the citizens of the region, but to protect our people who had to deliver those services to the region. We identified and leveraged and embraced new technologies. Teams. It was there. It was just waiting. It was just waiting to shine and help our employees be a resilient workforce because of this incident. We identified service gaps in the region. Metropolitan Transportation Services immediately stepped up and plugged some gaps in getting critical medical, hospital and long-term care employees to their workplaces because transportation was so impacted. And then another way in which we just really responded and used the tools that we had to help our society, really in our world, deal with COVID was in taking data that we have and turning it into useful data for this region. And I'll highlight that in a minute. We learned that our Met Council leaders were a coveted asset and could and were taken away to serve in a higher level. We learned that our advanced crisis preparations and emergency planning, stockpiling, could be and were taken away, both on the Metro Transit side of the equation and environmental services in terms of protection, personal protection equipment. We learned that we could respond to and manage multiple crises at one time. And we learned that we needed to fine-tune, or that we need, not past tense, fine-tune process around our decision-making at time of crisis, which is really good information for us for next time. We learned that linking our response to the state of Minnesota, it was good, but it also hurt us in some ways. And that's good information for, again, next time as an organization. We learned that the extreme duration, we were activated for 2 years. And we learned that that was a pain point for us as an organization. We learned that pain points in our pre-COVID life became exponentially more painful during COVID. Multiple systems specific to finance, procurement, and asset management systems. And it just kind of muddied the waters in our ability to be resilient and flexible and responsive in a crisis. We know it now, we'll figure it out. And then we also learned that practices and processes that we developed to respond to and manage the crisis were really, really good processes and practices, and they've stayed since COVID went away. The notable one there is the collaborations between our finance people and directors across this organization. And they continue to meet on a regular basis to work together to figure out the things they need to figure out. These are my favorite slides. We made huge differences regionally, statewide, and nationally as an organization. Regionally, I referenced it earlier, Metropolitan Transportation Services, just unplanned, improvised in the moment to identify gaps that they could mitigate in our region's ability to deal with the COVID situation. Not just with transporting healthcare workers, but in also helping vulnerable populations get connected to food. So they made a huge difference there. Community developments, HRA development support of the HRA system empowered and enabled tenants, building their confidence and independence. I think we all learned to be more technical as a result of COVID, including our customers. Excuse me. And then Metro Transit's completion of 99% of scheduled services every single day. Excuse me, during COVID. Our services never stopped as an organization for this region. Statewide, the differences that we made, Metro Transit collaborated with the Minnesota Department of Health and Blue Cross Blue Shield to build and deploy mobile vaccination clinics. They retrofitted buses, and those buses went all over the state of Minnesota.
Kathy, how many more slides do you have?
2, 3.
Oh, good.
2.
Okay.
Yes, I'm almost
Thanks.
done.
Sorry.
I'm almost done, yep. And then information services collaboration with the state of Minnesota to develop and maintain the Find My Vaccine and Find My Test applications that every state citizen, if they were looking for vaccinations and looking for testing, they used those tools to get connected with those services. And last but not least, nationally, Community Development's HRA group again developed and implemented a virtual process and procedures for conducting virtual inspections, protecting their people and protecting citizens. And then Environmental Services, this made the news all the time, their collaboration with the University of Minnesota to detect COVID in wastewater, and actually report on that and make predictions and planned responses with, as a result of that information. This was one of the quotes from the interviews that I did. And they said, I've said it before and I'll say it again, it was one of the best cross-divisional functional coordination efforts we've ever had here, and I've done a bunch of them. I was kind of proud of that, and us.
Kathy, wonderful. Wow. More time for questions, which we don't, but
know where to
a
find me
tremendous
if you have any questions.
presentation. It all gives us a combination of pride and PTSD, so
Thank
it's
you, Chair
okay.
Zolli and Council.
We did well, and really appreciate that. We are at time because we have a hard stop with another meeting kind of coming up. I don't have any reports. I do want to recognize that it is Francisco Gonzalez's last council meeting. And I'm looking over and seeing you, and you look so healthy and great, and I'm going to hold that image. I just have to say, even though, we're at time, but there's never enough time to describe what you mean to all of us. You have been here, and I know when there's an underdog, when there's something that's important to this region, you've stopped us all, and you've exhibited the values that I think we all kind of embrace and appreciate your voice so much, and not least of which the EAC, which you've been a champion for, and we're going to, John here is going to tell me he's going to be as a champion as much, but we have to kind of pick that up, and you've been at that, articulating their needs, that important population, that important element all along. So I won't go on and on, I guess I could, but thank you so much, and we honor you today, your last meeting.
After those kind words, I'm resigning my resignation.
Good.
I just enjoyed my time here with all my fellow council members and the great staff that we have here. So I will certainly try to remain engaged in the activities of the Met Council. So it's not goodbye, it's just hasta la vista.
I like that. One never leaves the Met Council. I see people come back all the time. But there you are. There's always a spot. Any other reports? Regional administrator?
I'll pass.
General counsel?
I will pass.
All righty. This meeting is adjourned.